The clink of ice and crystal, the low murmur of conversations costing more than my rent, the scent of seared scallops and old money. This was the air I breathed every night. At the Gilded Cage, I wasn't Layla. I was a ghost in a crisp white shirt and a tight red vest, a pair of hands refilling water glasses, a polite smile that never reached my eyes. Tonight, the air was different. Thicker, charged with the kind of tension that precedes a lightning strike. It all radiated from table 12, the best seat in the house, currently occupied by Mr. Kwon Jin-woo and his fiancée. He was a predator in a bespoke suit, stillness his most terrifying weapon. Every move he made was deliberate, economical, from the way he lifted his wine glass to the way his dark eyes scanned the room, cataloging threats I couldn't even imagine. Beside him, Mi-yeon was a masterpiece of cold fire, wrapped in an emerald green dress that clung to her like a second skin. She was beautiful, sharp, and the way she looked at him wasn't love. It was assessment. I'd seen that look on chess players right before they sacrificed a queen. My hand trembled as I cleared their appetizer plates. Tucked into the sleeve of my vest was a folded piece of paper, heavy as a tombstone. It had been pressed into my palm by Hector, one of the dishwashers, his eyes wide with a terror that was deeply, personally familiar to me. His family was caught in something, and this note was his only way out, and my only way in. Everything to your satisfaction? I asked, my voice a carefully constructed melody of professional deference. Mi-yeon waved a dismissive hand, her diamond bracelet scattering light. It's adequate, Jin-woo didn't answer. His gaze was fixed on the city lights glittering beyond the panoramic window, but he wasn't seeing them. He was listening. To the rhythm of the restaurant, to the beat of his own dangerous world. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the symphony of polite society. This was insane. I could just throw the note away, finish my shift, and go back to my life of scraping by. But Hector's face, pale and haunted, was seared into my mind. And something else, a reckless spark I thought had died long ago, flickered to life. I was tired of being a ghost. I approached their table with the water pitcher, my movements practiced and smooth, a ballet of servitude I had perfected. As I leaned in to fill his glass, my hand brushed his. For a fraction of a second, his skin, cool and smooth, met mine. In that brief contact, I let the folded note slip from my palm into his. He didn't flinch. His fingers closed around it with imperceptible speed. His eyes, black and depthless as a winter ocean, finally met mine. There was no surprise, no anger, just a terrifying, silent acknowledgement. He knew. The world tilted on its axis, and I knew, with chilling certainty, that my life as a ghost was over. I had just stepped into the fire. He didn't look at the note. Not at first. He simply held it in his hand, his thumb stroking the crease, as if it were a rosary bead. Mi-yeon was mid-sentence, her voice a polished blade dissecting some rival's fashion choice, but she faltered, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. The gravitational pull of the room had just centered entirely on the man beside her. Jin-woo, she prompted, her smile tightening at the edges. Did you hear me? He gave a slow, deliberate blink, pulling his attention back to her. But it was a performance. I saw it from my station across the room, where I pretended to polish silverware with hands that shook so badly, I was surprised I didn't drop the fork. His focus was a laser, and it had been recalibrated. He was no longer just in the room. He was hunting in it. Forgive me, he said, his voice a low, smooth baritone that was more unnerving than any shout. I was just thinking about the logistics for tomorrow. He placed the note on the table, still folded, and slid it beneath the edge of his saucer. A secret hidden in plain sight. Mi-yeon's eyes, sharp as obsidian shards, darted to the small square of paper and then to my face. Suspicion bloomed in her expression, ugly and immediate. She saw me. Not the waitress uniform, but the girl who had just passed a message. My blood ran cold. I forced myself to turn away, to pick up a tray, to move toward the kitchen. Every step was a lifetime. I could feel her stare burning into my back, feel the silent, furious questions she was aiming at Jin-woo. The low hum of the restaurant suddenly sounded like a roar in my ears. The kitchen doors swung open, and I was hit with the familiar cacophony of clattering pans and shouted orders. Hector was by the sinks, his head down, scrubbing a pot with a ferocity that was pure fear. He wouldn't look at me. He had done his part. Now we were both just waiting for the fallout. I leaned against the stainless steel counter, trying to catch my breath. What had I done? I hadn't just passed a note. I had lit a fuse. A long, slow-burning fuse leading directly to the man who commanded a room with a glance. I peeked back through the porthole window in the door. Jin-woo was unfolding the note under the table, his head slightly bowed. Even from this distance, I saw his shoulders tense, a barely perceptible tightening of the expensive fabric of his suit. Then he looked up, his eyes sweeping the dining room until they found me, a predator locking onto its prey. It wasn't a threat. It was a summons. My life was no longer my own. It belonged to him now, for however long he decided it would last. The end of the meal was a masterclass in tension. Mi-yeon's conversation became brittle, her laughter sharp-edged. She was probing, trying to find the crack in his composure, but there was nothing to find. He was a fortress, his expression unreadable, his words placid. He was playing his part, but I could feel the violence simmering just beneath the surface, a dormant volcano about to erupt. When he finally placed his napkin on the table, the simple gesture felt like a death sentence. "It's getting late," he said, his voice calm, but his eyes were on me. He stood, pulling out Mi-yeon's chair with a gallantry that was utterly chilling. She rose, a queen of ice, her gaze flicking between him and me, accusation clear in her eyes. "I need to use the powder room before we leave," she announced, a strategic retreat to regroup. As she swept away, Jin-woo took a step towards the maitre d's stand, ostensibly to settle the bill. But his path took him directly past my station. He didn't stop, didn't even slow down, but as he passed, he murmured a single word, so low I almost didn't hear it over the restaurant's ambient noise. "Exit, my shift wasn't over. I had tables to clear, checks to run." But his word was not a request. It was an alteration of my reality. I placed the silverware I was holding down on the linen-draped tray, my movements stiff and robotic. I walked away from my station, away from the half-eaten desserts and cooling cups of coffee, away from the life I understood. I moved toward the back of the restaurant, my heart a frantic bird beating against the cage of my ribs. The staff corridor was narrow and dimly lit, smelling of bleach and old grease. The emergency exit, a heavy steel door with a push bar, was at the far end. I could hear the faint sounds of the city outside, a distant siren, the rumble of traffic. It sounded like freedom, but I knew it was just the opposite. The door to the men's room opened, and Jin-woo stepped out. He grabbed my arm, his grip like steel, and pulled me towards the exit. There was no time for questions. Just as his hand hit the push bar, the world outside exploded. The sound was deafening, a spray of automatic gunfire shattering the night. The heavy door buckled, splintered holes appearing in the metal as bullets ripped through it. He threw his body against mine, shoving me down the corridor, away from the door, the hot shriek of ricocheting bullets screaming past my ears. The illusion of civility was gone, incinerated in a hail of gunfire. The gilded cage had become a war zone, and I was standing right in the center of it with the man who was the eye of the storm. We didn't go back, through the restaurant. He dragged me through a labyrinth of service corridors I barely knew existed, his movements fluid and certain. The distant screams of panicked diners were the soundtrack to our escape. He kicked open a door leading into the hotel kitchen that serviced the restaurant, a chaotic world of steam and shouting chefs who froze at the sight of him. He didn't pause, pulling me through the heat and clatter towards a freight elevator I'd only ever seen used for laundry carts. His phone was already at his ear. "Status," he bit out, his voice sharp and lethal. A muffled voice responded from the other end. He listened, his jaw tight. "Garage level. West exit." Now the elevator door slid open, and he shoved me inside, his body pressing me against the cold metal wall as he stabbed the button for the parking garage. The descent was dizzyingly fast. The air was thick with his scent, expensive cologne, gunpowder, and pure adrenaline. "What the hell is happening?" I gasped, my voice thin and reedy. His dark eyes bored into me. There was no comfort there, only cold, hard assessment. "You handed me a note that said, 'Your fiancé sold you out.' There in position, you tell me what's happening." The elevator shuddered to a halt. The doors opened onto a cavernous, poorly lit concrete space. A sleek black sedan was idling 20 feet away, its engine a low, hungry growl. Two men in dark suits stood beside it, guns drawn, their heads swiveling, scanning the shadows. As we ran for the car, the doors to the main elevator bank burst open. Mi-yeon stood there, her emerald dress a slash of color in the grim twilight of the garage. Her face was a mask of fury. Jinwoo, what is this? Before he could answer, two figures emerged from behind a concrete pillar, weapons raised. The men by the car opened fire. The garage erupted into a maelstrom of noise and chaos. Jinwoo threw me behind him, pushing me toward the open rear door of the sedan as he drew a handgun from beneath his jacket with impossible speed. He fired twice, two precise shots that echoed like thunder. One of the gunmen crumpled to the ground. He shoved me into the back of the car. "Get down," he roared, turning to face Mi-yeon. She wasn't looking at the shooters. She was looking at him, her expression one of pure, unadulterated hatred. The surviving gunman fired, and Jinwoo's men returned a volley of shots, driving him back. In that split second of chaos, Jinwoo grabbed Mi-yeon's arm, yanking her from the elevator and shoving her into the car beside me before diving in himself. The tires squealed as the driver floored it, the car lurching forward and rocketing towards the exit ramp, leaving the echoes of gunfire and betrayal behind us. The silence inside the armored car was louder than the gunshots had been. It was a suffocating, heavy blanket of rage and unspoken accusations. I was pressed against the leather seat, my body trembling, the smell of cordite clinging to my clothes. Beside me, Mi-yeon was rigid, her beautiful face contorted with fury. Jinwoo sat opposite us, his expression carved from stone, the gun still resting loosely in his hand. The city blurred past the tinted windows, a smear of neon and shadow. "You will explain this," Mi-yeon hissed, her voice shaking with venom. "You will tell me why you humiliated me, why you dragged me out of there like a criminal." Jinwoo didn't even look at her. His gaze was fixed on me. It was an unnerving, penetrating stare that stripped away every defense, every lie, leaving me utterly exposed. "The note," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "Where did you get it?" My throat was dry. I could feel Mi-yeon's hatred boring into me from the side. I was a waitress, a nobody. I had no place in this world of violent men and treacherous women. "A dishwasher," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "His name is Hector," he said. "He said his family was in trouble. He begged me." Jinwoo's eyes narrowed slightly. He was processing, analyzing, connecting dots in a constellation of violence I couldn't comprehend. "And you, a waitress, decided to risk your life for a dishwasher you barely know?" The question was a trap. The wrong answer would get me killed. I had to choose my words carefully. My survival depended on it. "He was scared," I said, my voice gaining a sliver of strength. "I know what that looks like. And I know what it looks like when people like you," I glanced at Mi-yeon, "treat people like us as if we're invisible. Sometimes the invisible people see things, a flicker of something, respect." Intrigue passed through Jinwoo's eyes. He turned his chilling gaze back to his fiancée. "The Park family," he stated, not a question but a verdict. "You thought you could trade me for a better position at their table. You thought they could succeed where everyone else has failed." Mi-yeon laughed, a high, brittle sound devoid of humor. "You arrogant bastard. You think this is all about you? You are a relic, Jinwoo. A king on a crumbling throne. The Parks offered me a future. You only ever offered me a gilded cage." The words hung in the air, a confession and a declaration of war. He absorbed the blow without flinching. "The cage was for your protection," he said quietly. "But I see now I should have been protecting myself from you." He leaned forward, and for the first time, I saw a crack in his icy control. A deep, burning rage that was terrifying to behold. They were in position. "Your note." He glanced at me. "It saved my life." "Hers," he nodded at Mi-yeon. "Ended yours." We arrived at a place that didn't seem to exist. The car descended into a subterranean garage, and a heavy steel door slid silently shut behind us, cutting off the outside world completely. The apartment we entered was the antithesis of the opulent restaurant. It was brutally minimalist, all clean lines, polished concrete, and cold chrome. There were no photographs, no personal touches. It wasn't a home. It was a fortress, a high-tech bunker disguised as a luxury penthouse. Jinwoo's men, the same two from the garage, escorted Mi-yeon into a side room. She didn't struggle. She walked with her head held high, her emerald dress a final act of defiance. The click of the door locking behind her was deafening in the silence. Then I was alone with him. The adrenaline that had been coursing through my veins began to recede, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion and a paralyzing fear. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, which currently displayed a hyperrealistic image of the city skyline. With a tap on a hidden panel, the image dissolved, replaced by solid black armored steel.
"We were sealed in."
"Get cleaned up," he ordered, his back still to me. He gestured to a doorway. "There are clothes in the closet. Anything will fit." It wasn't a suggestion. I moved on autopilot, my legs unsteady. The bathroom was larger than my entire apartment, a sterile chamber of white marble and gleaming steel. I stripped off my uniform, the red vest, the white shirt stained with a smear of something I prayed wasn't blood, and stepped into a shower with a dozen jets. The hot water felt like a punishment, scouring away the grime of the restaurant and the terror of the garage, but it couldn't touch the cold fear lodged deep in my chest. I found the closet he mentioned. It was filled with simple, expensive basics in black and gray. Cashmere sweaters, silk blouses, tailored trousers. It was a wardrobe for a ghost, for someone who needed to exist without being seen. I pulled on a pair of black trousers and a soft gray sweater, the luxurious fabrics feeling alien against my skin. When I emerged, he was sitting in a low-slung leather chair, a glass of amber liquid in his hand.
He hadn't changed.
He looked just as immaculate as he had at dinner, as if the gunfire and chaos had been nothing more than a minor inconvenience. He gestured to the chair opposite him. I sat, perching on the edge of the cushion. He studied me for a long moment, his eyes dissecting me piece by piece. "You have a choice," he said finally, his voice a low rumble. "There is a car waiting. It can take you anywhere you want to go. There will be money in an account, enough that you never have to serve another overpriced meal for the rest of your life. You disappear. You forget tonight ever happened. You forget me. It was a tempting offer. A return to anonymity.
Safety."
But as I looked at him, at the raw power and the deep, hidden wound of betrayal in his eyes, I knew it was a lie. There was no going back. The Parks knew about the restaurant. Mi-yeon knew my face. My old life was a ghost town, and I was its only resident. Disappearing meant running forever. "What's the other choice?" I asked, my voice steady, surprising even myself. A slow, dangerous smile touched his lips for the first time. It didn't reach his eyes. "The other choice," he said, leaning forward, the intensity of his gaze pinning me to my seat, "is you stay. You become a ghost of a different kind. You work for me. The people who tried to kill me tonight won't see you coming. They're looking for soldiers. They won't be looking for a waitress." The choice wasn't really a choice at all. Running was a slow death. Staying was a gamble, but at least I'd be holding some of the cards. "I'm not a soldier," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I don't know how to do what you do. I can teach you," he replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I can teach you how to survive in this world. But I cannot teach you how to be invisible. You already are. That is your weapon," and so, my transformation began. The next few days were a blur of disorientation and brutal education. The sunless, sterile apartment became my entire world. Jinwoo became my teacher, my warden, and the sole focus of my existence. He taught me about the intricate web of power he commanded, about the rival families like the Parks who were constantly circling, looking for weakness. He spoke of them with a detached, clinical precision, as if discussing a problem in mathematics rather than a network of people who wanted him dead. He showed me schematics of buildings, faces of his enemies, and taught me how to read the subtle language of power and violence. Our training was relentless. He took me to a soundproofed range in the sublevels of the building and taught me how to hold a gun, how to stand, how to breathe, how to make the weapon an extension of my will. The first time I fired it, the recoil slammed into my shoulder, and the noise was a physical blow. But he was patient, his hands correcting my stance, his voice a low murmur in my ear, guiding me. "Don't fight it," he'd say, his body close behind mine, his hand covering mine on the grip. "Anticipate it. Become part of it." The proximity was unnerving, a spark of dangerous intimacy in the cold, clinical environment. There was a charge between us, a current of awareness that had nothing to do with the lessons and everything to do with the power dynamic, the shared trauma, and the unspoken acknowledgement that we had saved each other's lives. He taught me how to move, how to walk into a room and see the exits, the threats, the angles. He taught me how to lie not just with my words, but with my body, with my eyes. One evening, he laid out a plan on a large digital screen that rose from the center of a concrete table. It was an attack, a swift, brutal retaliation against the parks. They think I'm wounded in hiding, he explained, his finger tracing a path through a blueprint of a luxury hotel. They're getting bold. Their leadership will be meeting here tomorrow night to divide my territory. He looked at me, and I saw the purpose behind my training. They've tightened their security. My men can't get close. But they're not looking for a new member of the hotel's catering staff. My blood ran cold.
He was going to send me in.
You want me to walk in there? I want you to be a ghost, he corrected. You will plant a listening device. You'll get me confirmation of who is in that room. And then you will walk out. That's all. It sounded so simple, but we both knew it was a suicide mission. I was the expendable asset, the unknown quantity he was willing to risk. I looked from the blueprint to his unreadable face, and I saw my future laid out before me. It was a path paved with fear and violence, but for the first time in my life, it was a path I was choosing to walk. When do I start? I asked. The night of the mission, the air in the apartment was thick with unspoken tension. Jin-woo helped me prepare, his movements precise and impersonal, yet the act itself was intensely intimate. He fitted a communications earpiece, so small it was nearly invisible, into my ear. His fingers brushed against my skin, sending a jolt through my entire body. He adjusted the collar of the generic catering uniform, his knuckles grazing my throat. We were so close I could see the faint lines of exhaustion around his eyes, the only sign of the pressure he was under. The device is in the sole of your shoe, he said, his voice a low murmur meant only for me. The target is the conference room on the 34th floor. It will be under the table on the central support pillar. A simple magnetic plate. Place it and walk away. He handed me a small, weighted tray. You're delivering champagne. A celebratory gesture from the hotel manager. They won't question it. I looked at my reflection in the dark screen of the television. The woman staring back was a stranger. Her eyes were hard, her face a mask of determined calm. The frightened waitress was gone, buried under layers of training and necessity. I was his weapon now, honed and aimed. What if something goes wrong? I asked, my voice steady. His gaze met mine, and for a fleeting moment, the mask of the mafia boss slipped, revealing something raw and vulnerable beneath. I will be listening to every breath you take. You will not be alone. The unspoken promise hung in the air between us. He would burn the city to the ground to get me out. It was a terrifying and seductive thought. His driver took me to the hotel's service entrance. Walking through the bustling kitchen, the familiar sights and sounds of my old life felt like a dream. But this time, I wasn't invisible because I was insignificant. I was invisible because I was deadly. I loaded the champagne flutes onto my tray and took the service elevator to the 34th floor. My heart hammered against my ribs, a steady, powerful rhythm, not of fear, but of focus. 2 guards stood outside the conference room doors, mountains in ill-fitting suits. They barely glanced at me as I approached. Champagne, compliments of the manager, I said, my voice smooth and deferential. One of them grunted and opened the door. I stepped inside. The room was full of smoke and the low rumble of men's voices. At the head of the long table sat Lee Park, the patriarch of the rival family, his face a landscape of cruel ambition. My eyes scanned the room, cataloging the faces Jin-woo had shown me. They were all there, a pack of hyenas ready to feast. I moved around the table, pouring champagne, my movements fluid and unobtrusive. As I reached the head of the table, I pretended to stumble, catching myself on the edge. The tray tilted, and I bent down to steady it, my body shielding my actions. My hand went to my shoe, my fingers closing around the cool metal of the device. In one smooth motion, I reached under the table and snapped it onto the central pillar. It clicked into place with a faint, satisfying sound that was lost in the noise of the room. I stood up, my task complete. But as I turned to leave, my eyes met those of a man sitting at the far end of the table. It wasn't one of the Parks. It was Mr. Choi, Jinwoo's most trusted advisor, the man who ran his finances. He gave me a slow, chilling smile of recognition. And I knew the betrayal wasn't just Mian. It was deeper. It was a rot from within his own house. A cold dread washed over me, more paralyzing than any fear I had felt before.
Choi.
He was the real snake. Mian was just a pawn, a distraction. He had been playing a long game, orchestrating Jinwoo's downfall from the inside. His smile was a death sentence. He knew who I was, and he knew why I was there. "There's a traitor in the room," I whispered, my lips barely moving, hoping the microphone could pick it up. "It's Choi. He's with them." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line, then Jinwoo's voice, cold as ice. "Get out. Now," but it was too late. Choi stood up, holding his glass. "A toast," he announced, his voice booming in the suddenly quiet room. To new partnerships, his eyes were locked on mine. And to taking out the trash, the two guards who had been outside the door suddenly moved inside, blocking the exit. Lee Park looked from Choi to me, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. Well, what have we here? A little rat from a sinking ship. My training kicked in. My mind raced, assessing the room. 10 men plus the 2 guards, all armed. My only weapon was the tray in my hands and the element of surprise. They saw a waitress. They didn't see the woman Jinwoo had spent days turning into a weapon. "The device is active." Jinwoo's voice crackled in my ear. "I have them. Just stay alive, Layla." Stay alive, his use of my name, the raw urgency in his tone, was a jolt of electricity. I wasn't just an asset anymore. I was Layla. I took a deep breath. "I'm so sorry," I said, my voice trembling with manufactured fear as I looked at Lee Park. "I must be in the wrong room." I turned as if to leave, then spun back, swinging the heavy silver tray like a discus. It slammed into the face of the closest guard with a sickening crunch of breaking bone. He staggered back, and in that split second of chaos, I moved. I kicked the leg out from under the second guard, sending him to the floor. I didn't have a gun, but Jinwoo had taught me that anything could be a weapon. I grabbed a champagne bottle from the table, smashing it against the edge, leaving me with a jagged glass neck. The men were shouting, fumbling for their weapons, their complacency shattered. Choi was screaming orders, but it was too late. I was already a whirlwind of desperate motion. I lunged at the man closest to me, driving the broken bottle into his side. He roared in pain. I didn't wait to see the result. I dove over the table, sending glasses and papers flying, using it as cover. Bullets ripped through the polished wood, splinters exploding around me. I landed in a crouch on the other side, my heart pounding, adrenaline singing in my veins. I was outmanned and outgunned, but I was alive, and I was furious. The firefight was chaos. I was trapped behind the heavy conference table, the air thick with the smell of cordite and spilled champagne. The men were disorganized, firing wildly, their surprise having turned to rage. Choi was screaming, "Get her. I want her alive." That was my only advantage. They wanted to capture me, to question me. Jinwoo just wanted me to live. "The west wall is reinforced glass." Jinwoo's voice cut through the noise, calm and commanding in my ear. "Behind the curtain. It overlooks the rooftop terrace."
Can you get to it?
I peeked over the edge of the table. The heavy velvet curtains were 10 feet away. An eternity. "It's a long way." I breathed back, my throat raw. "I know. I'm on my way up." By me time, he was coming. The thought was a fire in my chest. I wasn't alone in this. I scanned the room for a weapon, a path. One of the guards I had taken down had dropped his gun. It lay on the floor near the door, impossibly far. I had to create another diversion. I grabbed a heavy silver ice bucket and hurled it towards the far side of the room. As heads turned, I broke cover, scrambling on my hands and knees towards the fallen guard's weapon. A bullet tore through the sleeve of my jacket, burning a hot line along my arm. I ignored the pain, my fingers closing around the cool, heavy steel of the gun. The weight felt familiar now, comforting. I rolled behind an overturned armchair and came up firing. I wasn't aiming to kill, just to suppress. I fired at the lights, plunging half the room into darkness and shadow. Men shouted in confusion. "Layla." Jinwoo's voice was strained. They're locking down the elevator. I'm coming from the roof, suddenly. The gunfire from the room was answered by a different sound, the percussive, heavy thud of automatic weapons from outside. The reinforced glass behind the curtains exploded inwards in a shower of deadly shards. Two figures in black tactical gear rappelled through the shattered window, guns blazing. Jean Wu's men. The tide of the battle turned in an instant. The park's men, caught in a crossfire, scrambled for cover. In the chaos, I saw my chance. I ran, not for the window, but for Choi. He was cowering near the back of the room, trying to use Lee Park as a shield. I tackled him, driving my shoulder into his stomach, and we went down in a tangle of limbs. He was stronger, but I was faster. I brought the butt of my gun down hard on his temple. His eyes rolled back, and he went limp. Just as Lee Park turned his weapon on me, a single shot rang out from the window. A perfect red circle appeared in the center of his forehead, and he collapsed onto the floor. Jean Wu stood on the terrace, framed by the shattered window, a smoking gun in his hand. He looked like a vengeful god, and in that moment, I understood that I had bound my soul to his. The aftermath was a scene of controlled, brutal efficiency. Jean Wu's men secured the room, their movements silent and professional. The surviving members of the Park family were rounded up, their new empire having crumbled in less than 10 minutes. Jean Wu stepped through the broken window, his expensive shoes crunching on shattered glass. He walked past the bodies and the wreckage without a second glance, his eyes only on me. He knelt down beside me where I was still breathing heavily, my gun trained on the unconscious form of Choi. He gently took the weapon from my hand, his fingers warm against my cold skin. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice low and rough with emotion. He saw the tear in my sleeve, the angry red line on my arm. His expression darkened. He carefully pushed up the fabric, examining the wound. It was a shallow graze, but it was a mark of the battle, a testament to the line I had crossed. "It's nothing," I said, but my voice shook. The adrenaline was fading, leaving a tremor in its wake. He said nothing, but his thumb gently stroked my skin, a gesture of unexpected tenderness that sent a shiver through me. He looked at Choi's unconscious form with pure contempt. "You did well," he said, his praise feeling more valuable than any amount of money. "You did more than well. You saved us." He stood and pulled me to my feet. I was unsteady, and he put a hand on my back to support me, a solid, grounding presence in the midst of the carnage. The power dynamic between us had irrevocably shifted. I was no longer just his asset, the invisible girl. I had faced death for him, fought for him. I had become an extension of his will, but I had done it with a will of my own. We were partners now, forged in blood and betrayal. His men dragged Choi away, and soon, we were the only two left in the destroyed room, surrounded by ghosts and the lingering smell of gunpowder. He led me out onto the terrace. The night air was cold, a stark contrast to the heat of the fight. Below us, the city glittered, a sea of indifferent lights. It looked like a kingdom. "Choi ran my entire financial network," he said, staring out at the view. "He was my oldest friend. He knew everything. The betrayal was a wound far deeper than any bullet could make." "He underestimated you," I said quietly. "He underestimated both of us." He turned to look at me, his dark eyes searching my face in the dim light. "He saw a waitress," Jean Wu said, a hint of a dark smile on his lips. "I saw a queen." The words hung between us, heavy with unspoken meaning. This wasn't a fairy tale. He wasn't a prince, and I was no damsel. He was a killer, a king of a dark and violent world. And I had just become his equal, his shadow, his blade. He held out his hand. It wasn't a command, but an invitation. An offer to rule this brutal, beautiful kingdom together. I placed my hand in his. It was a silent vow, a pact sealed not with a kiss, but with the shared knowledge of survival. My old life was gone, burned away in a blaze of gunfire. But as I stood beside him, looking out at the city that was now ours to command, I didn't feel loss. I felt a terrifying, exhilarating sense of beginning.